What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Air Jordan 39, and there's some crazy stats on these, as well as just some jaw-dropping missed opportunities. I think these are going to be a very polarizing shoe this year, and where you fall on that dividing line probably depends on, what you want out of these shoes. So let's get into it. Now, starting off in the uppers, the uppers are pretty hefty, actually. Number one, this shoe comes in at 16 ounces on the money in terms of men's size 11. A lot of that weight comes from the uppers, which we'll see when we get into the midsole. Now, the majority of the uppers is some really thick textile stitching and weaving. On the more inferior portion of the midfoot, there's actually like backing on this, and then there's this synthetic leather or pleather around kind of the distal lace line and going up here into the heel counter. The best part about the uppers to me comes in the tongue. This thing is super padded. It does have some holes for ventilation, which we'll get to in a second, but the main thing I like about this is in the more proximal ankle, as well as going into the midfoot and the forefoot. The tongue does have some beefy padding, so the laces do not irritate you whatsoever. Also, you've got metal reinforced lace eyelets, which is always a nice touch. They don't go back far enough, but that's another story. You look at this thing on the breathability test, though, these things did heat up 123.8 degrees. And although that is getting up there in terms of heating, what I noticed was even a little bit more concerning, though, was that if you look at the breathability mapping, really no fog getting out of anywhere. And when I was doing the heat test or the breathability test, and I had my heat gun over this, typically, right where, the heat gun is coming out, there's some pretty significant heating on top of the shoe, right? I always like to see how the outside of the shoe is heating up, seeing, the heat coming out of the shoe. And in this one, this shoe started out at 73 degrees. It did not get above 75 degrees throughout the entire heating process on the outside of the shoe. Typically, it's getting in, at least into the hundreds, right? It's getting really hot because, heat is radiating out of the shoe. In this one, it was all staying in. And I noticed that, especially playing on a hotter day, my feet were soaking wet in these things. And so, with a little bit of a harder backed upper, with the, really thick paneling on the uppers, the fact that there's no escape points, really no ventilation of air in these, yeah, it makes them very substantial uppers. And yes, the tongue is very comfortable, a lot of insulation, but also there's a lot of insulation. The gusset on these, to Jordan Brand's credit, is very aggressive, but it is a very thick gusset, and that's just one more layer between you and the outside of the shoe. I'd have liked to have seen at least maybe just a little bit more breathing, just some holes, right? Just poke some holes in it to allow a little bit more egress. Like I said, you got the padding correct. That feels awesome. It's just, like I said, the heating is crazy. You move back into the ankle collar, and these were some of the few shoes recently that have given me really bad blisters on my heel. Like, I had a real hard time breaking these in. Once the ankle collar broke in and I was able to tie these down a little bit better, that's when that stopped. The heel slippage was mild at first, but like I said, I kept getting that blistering, and then it was pretty much none once I was able to actually break the shoe and lock them down, and once I was able to stop that blistering. I'll tell you what, though, that irritation on my posterior Achilles, that lasted for a while, a little bit longer than I would have liked. Like I said, there's enough padding back there, but just kind of the profile of the shoe, the fact that the laces don't go so far back, so there is a little bit of micro motion there, a little bit of toggling is going to give a little more blisters. So I would say if you're going to get these, get a thicker pair of socks to start off with so that you're not irritating yourself, or wear them around the house for a little bit to break in that ankle collar so that you can lock these down a little bit better the first time you have them on to actually play in them. And on the upper durability test, 10-second tie grit sandpaper, the interesting thing is I had these outside the last time I played in them and when I was actually filming, and you can see where the burr gets right through that, synthetic leather, that pleather, whatever it is. And then right distal to that is where I was dragging it, and it almost looks the same. And that was only one day outside. When I had these on indoors, I wasn't really making many scuffs on them, but as soon as I got them on, a little bit of a grittier court, and that really wasn't that gritty of an outdoor court, immediately started tearing through these. So on an outdoor court, at least, especially in the summertime when it's hot, honestly, I think these are a no-go in terms of dragging, sliding, as well as heat and moisture retention. But getting into what is just the most unbelievable miss of this decade is the midsole teardown on these things. Now, number one, I love 90% of the setup of these. It is a bottom-loaded 3/4 Zoom Air unit, and on top of that is a full bed of molded Zoom X around the arch. It feels fantastic. The arch support on it when you first put them on feels unbelievable. There's no shank. And the thing is when I first saw them right online and I saw the molding on the outside, I said, this is probably going to be like the Vapor 11, where they basically just put some plastic on the outside of it to reinforce it. So, all the foam's going to be contained. It's not going to need an internal shank. This is just rubber. And it's flexible rubber, it's soft rubber at that. The durometer comes in at 10.75. We'll talk about that when we get to the outsole section. But this is not hard. This is no stiffer than the outsole rubber. So all that fantastic molding, that unbelievably comfortable feel underfoot, these are, if not the most comfortable shoe on foot when you first get them on, it's definitely one of them. You know, underfoot, not necessarily in the uppers, but underfoot. And, you know, it's going to get ruined if you're a heavier player at all or you wear these down. I mean, ZoomX foam does not last all that long, right? It's not stiff, dense Phylon. It's a lighter weight foam. That's why I said it seems to come in at 16 ounces, but most of the weight is in the uppers. I thought most of the weight was going to be kind of in the container of the ZoomX, right? Just to kind of hold it in. And I would think maybe there'd be a little bit more of a carrier foam or something on the outside, something. And no, and that makes these shoes incredibly unstable, especially in the rear foot, because the shape of the rear foot, it's not very wide. The thing is, if you look at the bounce height test on these things, 41 centimeters in the heel and then 50 in the forefoot. I think that's a new record. I had to go back and look, but that is unbelievable. That shows you what bottom-loaded Zoom plus ZoomX does on, on a flat surface. That is crazy. The thing is how are you going to take advantage of that when the shoe, here I'll get the one that's not cut open, when the shoe just crumbles in your hands? I mean, that's, to me, just throw a little bit of a shank on it, even underneath the Zoom, it's something, right? Give this shoe some structure, and this would have been such an elite setup. This would have been one of my favorite setups. When we get into the outsole section, get into the fit, we'll talk about some other really big issues, but to me, like I said, it was 90% there in terms of the midsole setup. It's just, you know, it's a miss on the simplest part of it. And speaking of all that, you know, looking at the outsole tread, honestly, I don't mind it. It's a pretty, you know, narrow herringbone pattern with a competing herringbone underneath of it that's very, very thin. And that goes full bed right from stem to stern. So, you know, a lot of opportunity for traction. You look at it on the grip test ramp, doesn't slip till 41 degrees, which is, you know, getting into the higher end. You look at it on the viewing box, you can kind of see that the movement there, that herringbone, it is, you know, like I said, a little bit more narrow herringbone. So there is some movement there. Like I said, the durometer is only 10. Outsole durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. Yep, millimeter of damage on these. So, you know, on outdoor courts, you know, at first they feel okay, right, when they're new, because, you know, they got ZoomX and Zoom Air, so they feel okay on the asphalt and cement. But like I said, they're so bendy and twisty that, you know, you're going to feel it later. It's like wearing an UFO sandal and walking around in them, thinking you're going to get all this recovery out of it, when really, when you're into something like that, where it's kind of like a squishmallow thing, you're toggling so much in it that, you know, you're actually activating more muscles, right, than saving, right, or recovering. So kind of same thing in this. I think their best surface, obviously, it's going to be hardwood, you know, rubberized. I think they're, you know, okay on carpet, but on outdoor courts, like I said, I mean, you can just see one time for me on an outdoor court, I was just scuffing the living daylights out of these. So take that for what you will. You look at these things, though, on the speed ratio, comes in at a 2.84, shank score of 0, obviously. They get no bump from that. I think that's kind of where they feel when they're new, right? Yeah, I mean, that bounce height, you know, 50 centimeters on the bounce height test, you know, speed ratio is probably going to be pretty high. And like I said, when they're new, yeah, they get up to speed pretty quick. It's just that, yeah, I mean, and they also feel very bottom light too, I should say, because, you know, a lot of the weight's in the uppers and you're wrapping that around your foot. So thing is once you start saturating the uppers, right, with sweat, it's going to feel even, you know, heavier. And then, because the shoe's going to get heavier, and then once that ZoomX starts bottoming out, right, then it's probably going to feel pretty dull. The one thing I noticed about these is, it's what happens when you come to a stop on these. Like, you really have to measure your steps. To me, these felt more like the LeBron witness lines and how unstable those felt. Because, yeah, ZoomX and Zoom Air on top of each other, they're fantastic, but it is still foam and then air between your foot and the ground. And as you can see, these things do not really have a lateral flange to speak of. And like I said, their rear foot is so narrow. They feel so unstable. It feels like you could roll at any point. So when you're getting up to speed and you're trying to stop really quick, there was a few times I buckled these shoes over. I could feel my fifth metatarsal head pushing under the shoe, right? Almost like in the Kobe 8 Protro. You know, these things are not laterally stable shoes. So yes, when they're new, they feel very speedy. But even when they're new, it's what happens when you come to a stop that is the real issue in these. And do you even have confidence to get up to your highest speeds in them? So I think that speed ratio in a very straight line when they are very new, yes, they do feel really bouncy. They do feel really, really quick. But as the shoe gets older and as you try to come to a stop, that's the big issue. And I think that's what the speed ratio on these it kind of overstates it a little bit. But getting into the fit of the Jordan 39, these things come in at a 14-degree inflare. That is really getting up there. Thing is, though, is pretty standard length, but 9.5 centimeter metatarsal width, 10.4 centimeter toe box width. It does have a 32-degree taper, but to me, they actually felt a little bit more forgiving than a lot of other Jordan brand and Nike shoes. Honestly, I had zero break-in in the forefoot and in the midfoot. It was all heel. I'd say a narrow and medium foot. I think you just go true to size on these. If you want to go down a half size, if you're narrow and short-toed, I think that's probably okay. A medium and a 2E, I'd say go true to size of 4E. I'd probably be going up a half size if you're out flared more, right? If you're long-toed, then you can go up one size on these things. Just remember, those uppers are going to start feeling pretty heavy the higher in sizes you get. In terms of the snake bitten foot, while they're new, I'll say the arch support in these things just feels fantastic to the point you don't even need an orthotic in them. It's just, it's going to break down so quick. And honestly, the shoe needs an orthotic for structure, right? So I would say with a lower profile orthotic, or even a bulky orthotic, because they will lock down eventually, you know, once you're breaking the ankle collar. I'd say with a more stout orthotic, right? Something that is not very flimsy or flexible, right? Something that's pretty stout. I think that these add a decent amount of structure to where they will at least protect that Zoom X a little bit. So I think with an orthotic, heel pain, ball of foot pain, yeah, I mean, these are fantastic. It's just that any bit of instability, whether it be medial instability, lateral instability, ankle sprainers, anything like that, if you're any bit concerned about that, then these things are an absolute no-go. And that's really unfortunate because the Jordan 38s, right, they just had a little lateral rubber clip flange and it was fine, right? That did just enough to make them okay for lateral, you know, instability. And these things, just they're so streamlined that, you know, to me, they're just, like I said, a no-go for that. So, like I said, they're forgiving enough with an orthotic in them so that you kind of protect the foam and yourself. Like I said, they're okay for most lumps, bumps, and bruises right on the bottom of your foot. But like I said, anything in terms of instability, whether it be medial instability, tendonitis, things like that, the shoe is just so flexible that it really does need a very, very stout orthotic to be really good for anything. And even at that, if the shoe is buckling underneath of you, it's folding like a lawn chair, and the orthotic isn't, that also might be a recipe for, you know, some stress strain issues. So I would say if you are someone that has some issues in them, aside from being a shoot around shoe, to me, it's not the best thing out there. And right there, talking about being a shoot around shoe, that's what brings me into the performance of these things. I do think these are a fantastic just shoot around shoe, right? Like if you're not having to make cuts or do anything, you know, really crazy in them, to me, they're one of the most comfortable shoes out there, right? You know, underfoot, I was wearing these to work a few days too. They felt great. I mean, I felt fantastic in these things underfoot. In terms of as soon as you start having to plant, put body weight anywhere, really jab step, or, you know, really try to change direction, step back, anything like that. Like I said, the shoe just feels like it is crumbling underneath of you. And that is really disappointing because it does look like a more maximalist shoe. It's just that it's in looks only. Underfoot and you know, in the gears of this shoe, they're just not very strong. And like I said, it's so disappointing because, you know, you could just put a little bit more here. You know, even if you just made the heel a little bit wider, you wouldn't even need, if you don't want to put the flange in it, right? If you want the shoe to, you know, be a little bit smoother, transition step a little bit better, then just make the heel a little bit wider so when you come down, it doesn't feel like you're immediately rolling your ankle. You know, in terms of, you know, driving to the hoop in a straight line, if you're going north to south with an orthotic in them, you're a lighter weight player, then yes, they do feel fantastic getting up and down the court, right? Just straight up and down for fast breaks, things like that. And like I said, for a comfortable shoot-around shoe, I can't think of much better shoes in terms of comfort. It's just, like I said, if you're any bit heavy at all, I mean, if you know, same as Nike running shoes, right? It's going to wear down, right? With Zoom X, it's going to wear down. So I think if you can keep them newer, right, if you can stress shield them with an orthotic and you want something, like I said, for an unbelievably comfortable underfoot feel for, you know, free throw shooting or just, like I said, very light, you know, shoot around practices, I think they're okay. As soon as you get into, like I said, a little bit more of a, you know, you're trying to create space for yourself or you're coming down on somebody else's foot, right? You're coming and landing. This is where I think that these things would really start to buckle because unlike, you know, you look at something like, you know, Joel Embiid's Skechers shoe, right? you know, I came down on my dad's foot on those one time, and that thing stayed so stable. You could just tell, whereas in this one, you could tell it just, you know, kind of buckle underneath you. So like I said, it's close. It is so close to being such a good shoe. And I hope that maybe in the low or in the 40, we get kind of the complete package of this, because like I said, it has such potential. Everything is there. It just needs that little bit of an extra push. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below about these, especially because I do think these are going to be a polarizing shoe this year. So make sure you let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you do want to see a shoe from Jordan Brand, like I said, I think has been getting better and better and better down the line, the Luka 3 go under the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.